Welcome to another edition of Time Sucks, Short Sucks. I'm Dan Cummins, and today we will be diving into the exciting world of prison escapes. What's more exciting or fascinating than a good prison escape story? Not much. Perhaps we should all root for convicted criminals to remain behind bars, but when they defy the odds and free themselves from a life of incarceration, doesn't a part of us usually think something along the lines of, "Holy shit, you did it! Go, buddy, go!" Maybe we see a bit of ourselves in those who pull off a death-defying escape. Maybe we like to think that even if the state put us away for life, maybe, just maybe, we could bust out and live free again. No one's going to stop me. I'm a golden god. Most of the time, a true crime tale ends with the perpetrator behind bars serving out the full term of a very lengthy sentence, while the victims and the victims' families can remain safe in the outside world, knowing that the person who tormented them is locked up for the foreseeable future. But every once in a while, a few unexpected chapters are written for those tales. And those chapters rivet us, don't they? From the many supervillains of DC and Marvel who just seem to keep getting out of their high-tech jail cells, to the fictional mastermind Hannibal Lecter, to real-life suck alum Ted Bundy, prison breaks fascinate and terrify us. Though many of us probably would like to think that modern technology has made prison breaks impossible, well, you'd be wrong. Humans are still humans. Meat sacks still be meat sacks. And any system designed by us is bound to be imperfect, and inevitably, a few of us will manage to slip through the cracks and run free.
Words and ideas can change the world.
I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother.
I have a dream.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
Your only chance is to leave with us.
It should come as no surprise that prison breaks are, well, probably about as old as prisons themselves. And how long have prisons been around depends on how you define prison. The earliest written records of places where people have been held captive for breaking laws date back to around 1000 BCE in the early historical civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt. These early prisons were mostly short-term detention centers built as underground dungeons. Offenders would be held there briefly until they were sentenced to either death or slavery or torture for funsies. There aren't many records of escapes from this era, but I'm guessing it happened. So much of what went on in those days was never written down. I imagine every civilization ever has had their escape artists. If necessity is the mother of all invention and you need to escape from some dungeon to keep your neck out of the hangman's rope or worse, it makes sense. You're suddenly going to be the most inventive motherfucker you have ever been. For much of the first 2 millennia of the Common Era, the imprisoned were not held in prisons in the way we think about them today. There were, for example, workhouses in England and the Netherlands in the 16th century that held a big mix of people, including vagrants, debtors, and sex workers. They were held while awaiting trial for minor crimes or held until they paid a fine or for other administrative purposes. Some scholars have argued that those facilities were the first prisons, but most view them as more similar to what we would call a jail, a short-term holding cell, not a place of long-term incarceration for those who have broken society's most egregious crimes. There weren't many places of long-term incarceration until very recently. For most of human history, if you committed a serious crime, rather than be held in a cell year after year, you were either brutally or physically punished or killed to pay for your crimes. Fast forwarding to the 1600s and 1700s, in England and colonial America, the primary form of punishment was capital punishment, especially in the colonies. Those Puritans, they were execution crazy. Pretty much everything was a capital offense, including moral offenses like adultery, religious offenses like breaking the Sabbath. In 1648, for example, Puritan midwife Margaret Jones was hanged in the Massachusetts Bay Colony for witchcraft, the first of many women to be hanged for being witches. One of the most damning bits of evidence against her, quote, "She had upon search an apparent teat, as fresh as if it had been newly sucked, and after it had been scanned upon a forced search, that was withered, and another began on the opposite side." Yeah, how fucking dare she have a fresh teat? A fresh teat that then got all like withered and shriveled and gross and shit, and then her other teat got all hard and stuff, and fuck that witch. Surefire evidence of the practicing of the dark arts. Yeah, you bet. 7 years previously, in 1641, Puritan William Hackett was hanged in the same colony for buggering a cow, on the Sabbath no less. Come on, silly Billy. Everybody knows you can't fuck a cow on Sunday. A woman who had missed church that day witnessed him, a fellow lawbreaker. Billy confessed to his disgusting crime, kind of. He admitted to attempting to bugger the cow, but he said he was unable to penetrate the beast due to being interrupted by the woman who witnessed him. And yet, even though he never slid his hard dick into that sweet, sweet cow hole, he was still killed. With most crimes in the Puritan era, authorities would often let you slide for your first offense, and they handed out a lot of pardons to prevent their super insane, what in the actual fuck was wrong with the Puritans and their system of justice from killing everybody. Over time, the puritanical legal code softened so that less serious offenses like cow buggery were typically punished with corporal punishment like whipping or branding, usually on the cheek or the hand, and not with an execution. Sometimes, to show how close you came to getting executed, you would also be sentenced to spend an hour or so standing on the scaffold where they hang people with the noose around your neck. So you had a little feel for what it would be like. In the 16th and 17th century, banishment was a common punishment, but there were a lot of problems with this. People could disguise themselves or just simply return years later, hoping their crime had just been forgotten about. Banishment didn't end up being a huge deterrent, nor did it really protect people. In the 18th century, fines were also widely used, often in combination with corporal punishment. By the time the idea of what resembles a modern prison came around in the late 18th / early 19th century, at least in the U.S., it was seen as a particularly ingenious invention. On the one hand, it was considered much more humane than previous punishment methods. It also prevented someone who had just committed a crime from being released back out onto the street, a possibly much, much angrier person for having been branded or whipped recently. But of course, it also opened up the possibility that some of these people could just escape. And now let's go over some of these escapes. We've already covered in episode 264 of Time Suck, probably the most infamous prison in America to break out of, Alcatraz. So I'll just skim over some details here today. Located on a lonely little island in the middle of the San Francisco Bay, Alcatraz, aka the Rock, had held captives since the Civil War. But it wasn't until 1934, at the height of a new major war on organized crime in America, that Alcatraz was refortified into what was supposedly the world's most secure prison. At least that's how it was advertised. The redesign included tougher iron bars, a series of strategically positioned guard towers, a big bay of cold-ass shark-infested current-filled water around the island the prison sits on. I mean, that was already there, but I just want to make sure that you know that that's what it was. And strict rules, including a dozen checks a day of the prisoners. Escape seemed damn near impossible. But despite the odds stacked against them from 1934 until the prison was finally closed in 1963, 36 men tried 14 separate escapes. Nearly all of them were caught or died in their attempts, but not all. A few men may have made it off of the Rock alive. In 1962, Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin pulled off an ingenious escape, doing shit like filling their beds with cleverly built dummy heads made of plaster, flesh tone paint, real human hair that apparently fooled the night guards. Highly recommend looking that up on the interwebs to get some pictures of this dummy heads. It was pretty good. Using crude tools, including a homemade drill made from the motor of a broken vacuum cleaner, the plotters each loosened the air vents at the back of their cells by painstakingly drilling closely spaced holes around the cover so the entire section of the wall could be removed. Behind the cells was a common unguarded utility corridor. They made their way down this corridor and climbed to the roof of their cell block inside the building, where they set up a secret workshop. There, taking turns keeping watch for the guards in the evening before the last count. They even built a crude periscope for the lookouts. They used a variety of stolen and donated materials to build and hide what they needed to escape. More than 50 raincoats that they stole or gathered were turned into makeshift life preservers, and a 6 by 14 foot rubber raft, the seams carefully stitched together and vulcanized by the hot steam pipes in the prison. The idea for how to do that came from magazines that were found in the prisoner's cells. And they also built wooden paddles and converted a musical instrument into a tool to inflate that raft. I mean, these guys put together one hell of a plan. While putting all their supplies together, they were also looking for a way out of the building. The ceiling was a good 30 feet high, but using a network of pipes, they climbed up and eventually pried open the ventilator at the top of the shaft. They kept it in place temporarily by fashioning a fake bolt out of some soap. These guys worked on this escape attempt nightly for 6 full months. Then on the evening of June 11th, 1962, the 3 men, a fourth was actually supposed to come with them, but didn't finish removing his grill to escape from his cell in time. Sucked for that guy. They got into the corridor, gathered their gear, climbed up and out through the ventilator, and made it onto the prison roof. From there, they shimmied down the bakery smokestack at the rear of the cell house, climbed over the fence, snuck down to the northeast shore of the island, from where they launched that raft they made. And what happened next remains a mystery to this day. Did they make it to shore and start new lives in San Francisco? Did the raft fail them? Did they drown in the bay? We still do not know for sure. The FBI officially closed its case to trying to find these men 17 years later, December 31st, 1979, and turned over responsibility to the U.S. Marshal Service. Since the youngest of the three men would now be 93 years old, highly doubt the Marshals are currently really prioritizing solving this case. 23 years later, in a different part of the world, someone else would look to the sky instead of the sea to bust out of a prison across the Atlantic. In 1985, established escape artist, he had already successfully escaped incarceration 4 separate times. Frenchman Michel Vajour was slapped with an 18-year sentence for bank robbery and attempted murder. As soon as Michel was arrested, his wife Nadine enrolled in helicopter piloting classes, not suspicious at all, and soon enough she was a regular at a helicopter rental company in southern Paris. Nadine paid for her classes and rentals in cash, rented helicopters twice a month without garnering any suspicion. Meanwhile, inside the notorious Les Santé prison, Michel and his buddy Pierre Hernandez scoped out the grounds for an airborne escape attempt, hitting a snag when they realized there was no room on the ground for a helicopter to land safely. So they tweaked their plan a bit. And on May 26, 1986, at 10:30 a.m., Nadine flew a helicopter over central Paris, ignoring multiple frantic radio warnings. Soon she was hovering above the prison roof while chaos erupted inside the facility. Right on cue, Michel and Pierre burst through a door, racing across the roof. The guards, distracted by reports of inmates in the building with grenades, did not fire a single round, but those grenades were just nectarines that Michel had painted green. And that is pretty damn clever. Michel climbed into the helicopter, Pierre lost his nerve and surrendered, and Michel was flown the fuck on out of there. Nadine, flew her husband to safety, landing in a nearby athletic field where the two jumped into a waiting car. They then proceeded to evade capture for months, even snatching their daughters out from under police surveillance. 3 months later, however, the pair were arrested after committing another robbery. In the shootout that followed that robbery, Michel took a bullet to the head and survived. He was soon back in prison, where his 6th escape attempt with a new accomplice would end in failure. In 2003, Michel was freed, does not seem to have been imprisoned again. Stay in France for a moment, talk about helicopters a little more. Have you ever heard of Pascal Payet? Born in Montpellier, France, in 1963, Payet spent his childhood in Lyon. Lyon was more rough and tumble, but it was in Marseille where he would begin his life of crime around the age of 25. In 1988, he was convicted of aggravated assault, went to court again on charge of conspiracy in 1993, for which he was also convicted. The career criminal stepped it up on November 20th, 1997, when he participated in an attack on a Bank of France armored car. During the attack, a guard was killed, though Payet managed to escape until he was captured in Paris in January of 1999. From there, he was sent to prison in the village of Luynes. Unclear how long the sentence was. The prison had been opened on June 5th, 1990. Very modern prison. You can see from pictures the general structure of it. Central buildings and wings coming out of them like spokes on a wheel. It basically follows English philosopher Jeremy Bentham's idea of a panopticon, or a prison where you'd be able to look at all the occupants if you were standing in the middle. No privacy, no opportunity to escape. The prison was considered the most secure in the region, but Payet would soon prove that it was not escape-proof. On October 12, 2001, he escaped from Luynes via a hijacked helicopter along with his associate, Frédéric Impoko. Pretty fucking incredible. On October 18th, Impoko was captured, brought in for questioning in Paris. Meanwhile, Payet could have decided to lay low, maybe start a new life somewhere else under a new identity, but he was still thinking about the friends who he'd gotten arrested with, and he decided to organize an escape for them. So on April 14th, 2003, he's just been out for less than 2 years, more like a year and a half. He hijacks another helicopter, takes it back to the prison, frees Frank Perletto, Michel Valero, Eric Alburo, who'd been arrested with him in 1999 from that Luynes prison. Somebody had to have gotten fired after that one. A second helicopter prison break in less than 2 years. Come on, guys. Maybe put some new protocols in place for when you hear a helicopter approaching. They're not exactly quiet. They're not a sneaky vehicle of aviation. But then all these guys would be arrested 3 weeks later. Payet was now sentenced to another 30 years in prison. Then in January of 2007, another helicopter breaks him out. Holy shit! Some associates used one helicopter as a decoy, landing just outside the fence of the prison. Then a second helicopter lands outside the fence on the other side, opposite side of the prison. A few minutes later, distracts them further. They're chasing this other one now. Then a third helicopter lands inside the prison, and that helicopter was carrying a bunch of mimes who held up prison officials trying to explain without speaking that they had intended to land at a nearby convention center for a meeting of the International Union of Silent Clowns. But then a fourth helicopter drops down, easily picks the inmates up since the guards were so fucking over dealing with bullshit helicopters at that point. No, that's too much. No more helicopters. In January 2007, Payet confessed to organizing the 2003 escape, sentenced to an additional 7 years in prison. His co-conspirators, each sentenced to 3 more years. He was also sentenced to another 6 years for his own escape back in 2001. And authorities seem particularly intent now on making sure Payet actually served these years and did not again escape from prison. By July of 2007, Payet was one of the most closely surveilled prisoners in all of France, never kept at the same prison for more than 6 months. Guards at each new prison are briefed heavily on Payet being very highly likely to attempt an escape, and he was also continually placed in solitary confinement. Despite all those measures, July 14, 2007, taking advantage of Bastille Day celebrations, 4 masked men hijacked a helicopter from Cannes-Mandelieu Airport. They ordered the pilot to fly 20 minutes north to Grasse Prison, where they land on the roof at the start of the night shift and used heavy machinery to break open 2 doors and enter the isolation ward where Payet was currently being held. I lied. We are still not done with helicopters. This is the third fucking helicopter prison break this dude was involved in. Once they had Payet, they raced back to the chopper, took off. This prison break took less than 5 minutes. This helicopter landed near the small town of Brignon, about 24 miles away in the Mediterranean coast. Payet and his accomplices then fled the scene, and the pilot was released unharmed. The pilot later said, "There was no violence. They told me if I followed orders, there would be no harm." 2 days after his escape, a Europe-wide arrest warrant is issued against Payet, and after all that, he's captured again 2 months later, September 21st, 2007, in a suburb north of Barcelona, Spain. He was transferred to French custody on October 4th, 2007, along with 2 accomplices who had been captured with him, Alain Armato and Farid Wassou. And he was then imprisoned in a location which has been kept heavily secret for obvious security reasons. He was soon sentenced to an additional 15 years in prison with no chance of early release for a series of armed robberies and assaults against police officers committed while he evaded custody that last time. Dude just would not stop taking other people's shit. And he remains at the age of 61 incarcerated today. Who the fuck knows where he is? Probably waiting for another helicopter to come get him wherever he is. And it was so hard earlier not to say Barcelona with that little Catalonian lisp. Pascal's escapes were daring and creative, but as it turns out, you can escape from prison with a whole lot less technology than a helicopter. After I said Catalonia, I'm actually not positive. I went off my notes. I think Barcelona is in the Catalonian region. I'm not positive. Sometimes you can escape from a modern prison with no technology at all. South Korean Choi Gap-bak was arrested September 12, 2012 on suspicion of robbery. The 50-year-old man was put in a cell at a detention center in a police station in the city of Daegu. He had been in and out of prison for a variety of reasons for most of his adult life. Apparently in 1990, he and 3 accomplices broke through the slate roof of a jeweler's shop, stole over 13 million won worth of precious metals. He was suspected of stealing over 100 million won from various other places, including gas stations, was arrested on July 25th, caught, and according to one source, fighting and self-harming while brandishing a metal pipe. Was one of the things he did. Feels like there's a translation issue there. Or that dude just got so fucking amped, so just jacked up, just whooping ass with that pipe. He went a little crazy, started taking some shots on himself. On July 31st, 1990, while being transported to Daegu prison, the police escort bus slowed down due to traffic, and he unfastened his seatbelt, tore off the loose iron bars on the window next to him, and escaped from the bus through a little gap of, if sources are correct, about 8 inches. That's insane. He's a skinny little fella. Just 3 days later, August 2nd, he is caught again, though. He's arrested by police while hiding in the parking lot of an inn in Seoul, and he's transferred to Daegu prison. He spent some time there before getting released. Unclear exactly when he finished his sentence, but he wouldn't remain free for long once he got out, heading back to the prison in 2008 to serve a 4-year sentence now for the sexual assault of a middle school student before being released again in February of 2012. After that release, this fucking dirtbag pretended to run a paint business and rented a commercial building in Daegu where he sold some illegal form of gasoline. Feels like another translation issue, but maybe not. Never heard of a black market for gas, but apparently that is, or at least was, a thing. Weird. The owner figured out what he was up to, canceled his lease contract, asked Choi Gap-bok to vacate the warehouse, but Choi refused. After several days of fighting, he ended up being kicked out and forcibly removed. That apparently really pissed Choi off, so he tried to break into the second floor of the house where the landlord lived, July 3rd, 2012. Choi climbed down a thick braided wire from the rooftop. The landlord was sleeping in the living room, woke up to the sound of Choi trying to open his window, and the two got into a fight. Choi fled, was ultimately arrested at a nearby reservoir where he was hiding out September 12th, 2012. He'd already spent 23 years in prison, almost half his life. He'd also spent a lot of those 23 years practicing yoga, and that was about to come in very handy. This guy, in addition to being very, very thin, also a very bendy son of a bitch. Early in the morning, on September 17th, he put some kind of skin ointment that must have been pretty greasy all over his body, managed to slip out of his cell by squeezing through a tiny food slot, 5.9 inches tall, 17.7 inches wide. In addition to having a very slight build and being slippery, he must also be part fucking mouse and just to have one of those collapsible rib cages. Did you know that mice can collapse their rib cage? They have like collapsible skeletons. It's insane. He got his little baby man head out through that slot. No way my Frankenstein head is even coming close to moving through that space. Then he wriggled out his right spider arm and his bird-like shoulders. Apparently his little flat ass got stuck about halfway through, but he pulled down his shorts, managed to push himself free without somehow scraping his nuts off. Must have had some real slippery ointment and tiny nuts. The 3 guards on duty were all sleeping at this time. Great work, guys. Good job not even discussing the possibility of sleeping in shifts. The whole escape attempt took about 30 seconds. When the guards finally awoke, they saw there was a figure in the prisoner's bed, but they had no idea it was just pillows under blankets. The Korean Jungong Daily newspaper reported that after Choi escaped the jail, he ran into a nearby residence, stole car keys and a credit card. Police checkpoints have been established, but he ditched the car a couple 100 yards from the checkpoint, took off on foot for the nearby Namsam Mountain. A manhunt ensued for the next 2 days with helicopters, tracking dogs, and many searchers. Choi kept moving, working his way through the mountains under the cover of darkness, and he managed to avoid getting spotted. Eventually, he ended up in the city of Miryang. There, a villager saw him boarding a bus to another city, reported that to the police. But Choi told the driver he was feeling motion sickness, asked to be let off the bus early, and they did that. The police now resumed their search for him in the surrounding area, finding occasional evidence of his presence. A farmer named Lee reported that he found a note from Choi in his house. He didn't report it right away, though, thinking it was some sort of prank. But then he realized that some items were missing from his home, including a couple packs of ramen. The note read, "I am sorry," and was signed Framed Thief Choi. Why would you sign your own name if you're hiding from a police manhunt? People make the weirdest choices. By this point, Choi had a nickname. The press were calling him the Korean Houdini. The police began to search around the neighborhood of Miryang with some 400 officers and again mobilizing air surveillance and following up on numerous sightings of the escaped thief. Choi was finally discovered September 22nd, having spent 6 days on the run. He was found hiding in a cardboard box on the roof of an apartment building in Miryang. Doesn't sound like he got to really enjoy his freedom. When police caught him, he told them that he had been framed. Unmoved, police returned him to custody in Daegu, putting him in a cell right next to the one he had previously escaped from. Ain't that a bitch? The food slot in the new cell, only 4.3 inches tall and about 5 inches wide. So a little too small for even the Korean Houdini, even a mouse man, to compress his human-mice hybrid ribs and squeeze through. After all that shit, he was apparently only sentenced to 7 more years in prison that were reduced to 6 on appeal, so he is probably out now. Considering his sexual proclivities for middle schoolers, that really fucking bums me out. But America, far from the only nation that consistently fails when it comes to protecting children by going real soft regarding the punishment of sexual predators, so also not surprised. And now let's head back to the U.S. for our next escape. New York's Clinton Correctional Facility was built in 1844. For more than 180 years, it has served as both a source of employment for locals and a place to house some of the country's most infamous criminals. The prison was initially built to hold inmates who were then utilized as laborers for mining operations. Not just a mine that already happened to be there, but a brand new mine, especially built for the prison. In 1845, New York State granted 200 acres of land and $47,500 to build a prison and purchase an iron mine west of Dannemora. $30,000 for the prison, $17,500 for the mine. Prisoners from all over the state were first brought to Plattsburgh, then made to walk the 17 miles to Dannemora in all manner of conditions. The new facility was considered a frontier prison, was later referred to as Little Siberia due to its harsh winters and remote location. While engineer Ransom Cook's efforts to create a profitable iron operation led to the growth of the village of Dannemora, including 20 new buildings like hotels and stores, the iron operation was ultimately a failure. By 1861, officials realized that the mine would never be profitable, and by 1877, the entire enterprise was abandoned. However, Clinton Prison and the inmates remained. Prisoners were used for other trades, and in 1894, with the adoption of the state use system, prison laborers created goods like textiles for exclusive sale to state and local governments, giving Clinton Prison and its inhabitants a new purpose. In addition to providing a source of labor, the facility served another purpose. The cool air of the Adirondacks was thought to be effective in treating tuberculosis, and in 1901, Clinton Prison established a separate hospital ward for tuberculosis patients, including research facilities for doctors. The prison complex was curing people and also killing them. Clinton Prison was home to one of New York State's death rows and an electric chair, with 26 prisoners being executed in that chair between 1892 and 1913. In 1929, a riot at the prison caused $200,000 in damages, worth about $3.5 million today. The prison underwent significant changes in the early 20th century, with new facilities and buildings added to improve conditions. Vocational training programs also introduced, which taught prisoners valuable skills like carpentry, printing, plumbing, and even farming. This wasn't entirely unusual for most U.S. prisons. What was unusual was that the Clinton Prison had no escapes, not a single one, for the first 170 years of its existence. Not until 2015. Born in 1966, Richard William Matt grew up in foster care in suburban Buffalo. And yes, his name was Dick Willie Matt. And no, I will not let that slide. Dick Willie's father, Robert Matt, was a repeat criminal, having been convicted multiple times on charges such as assault, burglary, issuing bad checks, and criminal possession of stolen property. Dick Willie and his brother's foster parents, Vern Eden, and his wife were well known in the community for being exceptional foster parents. They made sure the brothers went to school, did their homework, ate regular meals, enrolled them in Little League, etc., etc. As a kid, Dick Willie was outgoing, well-liked, played a decent trumpet, had a high IQ, and apparently was considered a pretty handsome fella. But for reasons we cannot find, at some point his foster parents had had enough of some kind of shit going on, and they sent him to go live in a group home. He didn't like it there, ended up stealing a horse, riding away. Then at 14, tried to steal a houseboat after running away, and then his crime spree just worsened from there. From 1985 to 1991, he was arrested 8 times on various charges, including second-degree assault, the most serious of the charges, for beating up some woman, as well as criminal possession of a weapon, criminal possession of stolen property, and harassment. His brother also fell into a life of crime. Robert Matt was arrested 4 times between 1985 and 1988 on charges such as burglary, larceny, and third-degree assault. As far as the authorities know, the 2 brothers acted on their own for these crimes and did not commit any crimes together. At some point, Dick Willie got married, had a few kids, also acted as an informant for the police, but that would not keep him from ending up in prison. In 1986, while serving time on a forgery-related charge, Dick Willie escaped from an Erie County jail after scaling its barbed wire fence. A 4-day manhunt found him at his brother's place in Tonawanda, and now he goes back to prison. And he serves his time in this instance. In early 1997, fresh from completing a prison term for attempted burglary and parole violation, Dick Willie found work at William Rickerson's food brokerage company in North Tonawanda. The company bought and resold food nearing expiration. After a few months, he was fired. For some reason, Dick Willie had the idea that his 76-year-old boss had just piles and piles of discount perishable food cash at home. And along with an accomplice, Lee Bates, a young man he had met at a strip club, Dick showed up one night to rob William Rickerson. It was December. Snow was falling when they broke in. It was cold as fuck outside. Even after beating the elderly Billy Rickerson, they didn't find any money. So they put William, dressed in pajamas and bound in duct tape, in their trunk. And then Dick and Lee drove to Ohio and back for approximately 27 hours with a 76-year-old man in the frigid trunk of the car, periodically stopping to open said trunk to beat the shit out of this poor bastard. At one point, they bent back several of the old man's fingers until they broke. Dick Willie eventually killed Rickerson by breaking his neck. Then he cut up his body with a hacksaw and threw the parts into the Niagara River. Then after the torso was discovered and police began an investigation, he escaped down to Mexico with less than $100 on him, some credit cards, and a wedding ring. On February 20th, 1998, while in the border city of Matamoros, Dick Willie murdered a second dude, Charles Arnold Perot, an American engineer working at a local factory. He had tried to rob Perot and stabbed him to death at a bar as a guy was fucking taking a piss in a urinal. He was soon arrested, given a 23-year sentence for murder in a Mexican court. He would spend 9 years in a Mexican prison. Down in Mexico, he would get shot trying to escape, also end up getting his teeth knocked out, and then he got metal front teeth, which gave him a smile that, quote, would freeze a bobcat, according to one reporter. So now he literally looks like a Bond villain. In 2007, Dick Willie is extradited back to the U.S. to face trial for Rickerson's murder, where his old strip club buddy, Lee Bates, was testifying against him. Meanwhile, the police got a tip that some criminal associates of Dick Willie's were going to engineer an escape. Sheets of glass protecting the wood over the lawyers' tables were removed, so old fucking Tricky Dick couldn't smash them and use the shards as weapons. Extra deputies were posted inside the courthouse, a sniper stationed on the roof, and Dick was even forced to wear a stun belt on his thigh connected to a remote control held by a deputy in case that son of a bitch tried to run for it. After all that, nothing happened, and Dick Willie received a 25-year life sentence for second-degree murder with zero chance of parole until 2032. He was sent to Clinton Prison, where he will meet David Sweat, who had been there since 2004. Old Dave was born in 1980, making him 14 years younger than Dick Willie. He was raised in the Binghamton metropolitan area by his single mother, Pamela Sweat, along with his two sisters. He had a troubled childhood due to his, quote, violent tendencies, like throwing knives and rocking chairs at mama. Carl Butts, Pamela Sweat's boyfriend when her son was small, said he would also burn his toy cars or smash them with rocks and hammers and just generally appeared like a fucking psychopath just at an early age. Once took a knife to school, got suspended, got sent to live with an uncle in Florida. That didn't go well. Stole and wrecked his uncle's car, and then soon after that went into foster care. By the time, this kid's a fucking menace. By the time they were in their mid-teens, Sweat and his cousin, Jeffrey A. Nabinger Jr., were sporadically homeless. The two held short-lived jobs, but mostly made their money dealing weed. David Sweat also liked to come up with elaborate burglary plans, some of which he acted on. In 1996, as a 16-year-old, he and another teen attempted to steal computers and cash from a Binghamton group home where he was living, according to transcripts of a 1999 parole hearing. The two were going to wear ski masks and lock a woman in a storage room. Part of that plan involved obtaining blueprints and a layout of the home. The two were sentenced to 5 years of probation. A year later, David Sweat was convicted of second-degree burglary along with Jeffrey Nabinger Jr., his cousin, as he was planning to steal from his cousin's landlady. And with that, David Sweat entered prison for the first time. There, he kept scheming. In his cell, the authorities would find a list of future crimes he hoped to commit. He stupidly wrote down in a notebook, but for some reason, he still got parole. According to the parole transcript, David said he was going to take a correspondence course and become an auto mechanic, but he would not do that. Once he got out, he stayed with a girlfriend in Binghamton, off and on. When he wasn't crashing with her, he would couch surf, did shit like steal cars, then plot bigger crimes with his cousin. At the age of 22, David and his cousin Jeffrey, along with a friend of theirs, stole guns from a fireworks and firearms store in Great Bend, Pennsylvania, early on July 4th, 2002. Pretty dramatic theft. They stole a pickup truck, and then they drove that pickup truck into the fucking place through the front door. David had cased out the place previously, knew where to quickly find what they wanted once they literally smashed their way in. They sped away, it seems, in their busted up but still running truck that they stole, drove to Grange Hall Park in Kirkwood, New York, and then moved the weapons into another vehicle. Kevin J. Tarsia, a Broome County Sheriff's deputy, spotted them moving those weapons around 4 a.m. while out on patrol. When Deputy Tarsia approached them, David and Jeffrey opened fire and shot him multiple times. Then, while the poor deputy was still alive, David ran over him in his car, then stole his handgun and some flares. And the deputy would not survive that. Luckily, these assholes would not get away with this. 2 days later, after the police got a tip, they were arrested to avoid the death penalty, which was still in play in New York at the time. Both David and Jeffrey pled guilty to first-degree murder in July of 2003 in a deal to get life sentences without parole. And that was where David would meet Dick Willie. Cue rom-com music. Both guys, real sick of living behind bars. Since he'd first entered prison at the age of 19, Dick Willie had known freedom only for a total of about 4.5 years. Since he was first locked up at the age of 17, David had only been out for 3 years. Despite this, prison officials said they behaved themselves their first few years at the facility, like they were model prisoners. Each man only received one formal blemish. 2011, Dick Willie was found in possession of tattooing materials. And in September 2014, Sweat was disciplined for harassing another inmate. But that was it. And their good records graduated them into the honor block with its more generous privileges and more opportunities for escape. On June 6, 2015, they were moved into neighboring cells, and soon after that, they started talking about a potential escape. Both had access to the privileged sections of the prison, including the kitchen, which gave them access to some tools. When they walked around the prison field, the duo realized they had a speed bump in the field that was actually a large pipe, large enough for them to crawl through to escape. Meanwhile, Dick Willie established a relationship with the prison tailor, Joyce Mitchell, convinced her to sneak in hacksaw blades hidden in frozen hamburger meat. Dude had some game. Also, Joyce was very desperate for some love and affection and some prison dick. Joyce helped them collect other contraband, including guns, ammunition, camping gear, and a compass. And even did a little bit more. She apparently had numerous sexual encounters with Dick Willie in the tailor shop, despite her husband also working at the same prison. Oh, Joyce, bless your heart. What a peach. All of this allowed the guys to have the necessary tools to cut through the prison's walls and get the fuck out. They constructed and left dummies with the Clinton Correctional Facility sweaters on them and their beds that fooled the guards during their nightly check, similar to the Alcatraz escape I mentioned earlier. Also left a note on the pipe that they walked out. It said, "Have a nice day," accompanied by a quote, Asian smiley face wearing a triangular rice hat, according to one report. What the fuck was that about? Some reference to the Viet Cong using tunnels effectively in the Vietnam War decades earlier? I don't know. Originally, Joyce was supposed to meet them outside, provide them with a getaway vehicle, which they would then take to Mexico, but Joyce didn't turn up. Maybe she was just smart enough to realize these guys would have probably killed her and taken her car. And the pair had to continue on their way on foot, deciding now to head north to Canada. And of course, huge manhunt ensues. Authorities searched the farms and fields around the town of Willsboro, New York, after receiving a tip that the convicts may have been spotted there June 9th. Authorities spent June 9th and 10th retracing their steps near Dannemora after searching Willsboro, New York, and also expanded the search to the border with Vermont, believing the two may have tried to flee to that state. Almost every law agency possible was involved in this manhunt. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the FBI, U.S. Customs, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, state and local police, New York State Forest Rangers, and U.S. Marshals. A $50,000 bounty was set for each inmate by Governor Cuomo, subsequently increased to $75,000 when the U.S. Marshals added $25,000 per escapee. June 11th, bloodhounds picked up a scent. Authorities discovered a footprint in a wrapper, and police began methodically searching until nightfall, a wooded area near the nearby town of Katyville, New York. But that didn't turn up anything either. Expanding the search area further, billboards asking for help were put up in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Vermont, Pennsylvania, Canada. But on June 12th, the seventh day of the search, there were still no confirmed sightings of the escapees. Later that day, though, Joy Mitchell gets arrested and charged with aiding the convicts. And then 4 days later, Joyce makes a full confession. She confirmed providing Matt and Sweat with hacksaw blades, and Matt is, of course, Dick Willie, hacksaw blades, chisels, other tools, according to Clinton County District Attorney Andrew Wiley, or Wiley, I guess, who oversaw the prosecution of Mitchell. She had agreed to be the getaway driver, but backed out because she still loved her husband and felt guilty for participating. However, the very next day, June 16th, it was revealed that Joyce had discussed having her husband Lyle killed in a potential murder-for-hire deal with Dick Willie. That's the real Joyce. According to Joyce Mitchell's confession, Dick Willie referred to her husband Lyle as the glitch and planned to kill him after the escape. Dick Willie even reportedly gave Mitchell 2 pills to give to Lyle to incapacitate him so she could come drive them away. Authorities now knew how the men had escaped, but still nobody knew where they were. On June 22nd, the 17th day of the search, the manhunt shifted back to an area near the prison after a cabin near Owl's Head in Franklin County appeared to have been broken into. DNA from the inmates was found in the cabin, and investigators concluded that they had been there within the previous 24 hours. Also figured out that Dick Willie had gotten sick due to either eating spoiled food or drinking dirty water based on some shit-filled underwear they found. Oh, his foray into freedom not starting off well. Out there shitting through his britches. Probably the only pair of undies he had. Having a chapped butthole. Probably not how he envisioned his first few days living again as a free man. What authorities did not know was that Dick Willie Poopy Pants and David dripping more sweat down the crack of his ass than ever would soon part ways. David Sweatballs felt that the comparatively older and slower Dick Willie was slowing him down, making it more likely that they would get caught before the two made it to Canada. So they decided to part ways June 23rd. 3 days later, Dick Willie is spotted in Franklin County after he shot at the driver of a passing recreational vehicle with a 20-gauge shotgun he had stolen from a hunting camp. Smart enough to pull off a crazy escape, still impulsive and angry and dumb enough to do shit like that while on the lam. In an ensuing confrontation with authorities, he is shot and killed by 3 gunshot wounds to the head by U.S. Border Patrol supervisory agent and former Army Ranger, fucking hero, Chris Voss, in the wilderness of Owl's Head, south of Malone, New York. I love it, Chris. Love it a lot. Not 1 shot to the head, not 2, 3. Better safe than sorry. Got to make sure that true menace to society is dead and gone. But there was still no sign of David Sweat, not for another 2 days. Then on June 28th, New York State Trooper Sergeant Jay Cook happens to pass Sweat as Sweat is just walking down the road like a fucking idiot. As Cook circles back to question him, David starts to run across a hayfield towards a tree line, and then Cook, a firearms instructor, gives chase. When it becomes clear that David is not going to stop running and he is not going to catch him on foot, he fires 2 rounds from his .45 caliber Glock 37 pistol, and he hits Sweat twice in his right shoulder at a range of 73 yards. That is some impressive shooting for a handgun. Shot, I'm assuming, in a standing position while the officer is winded from running. At that distance, that's very impressive. David Sweat he got shot roughly, I don't know why I said only. He got shot roughly 1.5 miles away from the spot where Dick Willie had been shot and killed 2 days before. 4 days later, once he was listed as being in fair condition, David is moved to the special housing unit in the maximum security 5 Points Correctional Facility in Romulus, New York. New York has a lot of oddly named towns. Later, he will plead guilty to 2 felony counts of first-degree escape and an additional count of promoting prison contraband. Joyce Mitchell, she pled guilty to her involvement in the escape and is sentenced to a maximum of 7 years in prison, and she was ordered to pay $80,000 in restitution for damages incurred during the escape. Sweat was sentenced to 3.5 to 7 years to be served consecutively with his previous life sentence, further ordered to pay almost $80,000 in restitution, which wouldn't even touch the $23 million the manhunt had cost. Joyce served 5 years at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility in Westchester County, New York, released in 2020. Guessing at that time she was no longer married to the guy she wanted Dick Willie to snuff out. I hope not for that guy's sake. Have some self-esteem, my friend. Since this escape, prisons have gotten even better at keeping people in. Following many successful escapes, new protocols are instituted to make future escapes less likely, but escapes continue. Very recently, on April 29th, 2022, 56-year-old Vicky White casually left the Lauderdale County Jail to transport Casey White, 38 and no relation, for a scheduled psychological evaluation. Vicky was the assistant director at the Lauderdale County Jail in Florence, Alabama. In her 17 years as a corrections officer, she had made a great reputation for herself as a by-the-book, rule-following, law-abiding person. Though she was the jail's second highest-ranking officer, quote, she would get her hands just as dirty as the next one as far as needing to do something, one sheriff said. If there was a situation in the cell block, she was going right into the cell with other correction deputies. Vicky had even won the Employee of the Year award at the facility 4 times during her 17-year tenure and was actually set to win the award for a 5th time during her last year of service, but that would not happen. Casey White, a 6'9" behemoth of a psychopath, covered in tattoos, some of them white supremacist symbols, was waiting trial on a capital murder charge. Born on August 20th, 1983, this scary motherfucker had a very long criminal record. 2012, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for beating his brother in the face and head with the handle of an axe. March of 2016, he was sentenced to 75 years in prison for 7 counts that included attempted murder and robbery. In 2020, while serving his 75-year sentence at the William E. Donaldson Correctional Facility, he allegedly confessed to an investigator for a 2015 stabbing death of Connie Ridgway, a 59-year-old resident of Rogersville, Alabama, and was charged with capital murder. He was transferred to a detention center in Lauderdale County to face trial for Connie's murder. After being transferred, White recanted his confession and pled not guilty by reason of insanity, and his case had now reached a more momentary standstill. He left for a psych eval the morning of April 29th, 2022, and Vicky mentioned that she was going to go see her doctor. Right after taking him to that appointment, she was going to see her doctor that afternoon, since she wasn't feeling well. Right off the bat, that seemed a little suspicious. Inmates being taken to the courthouse were supposed to be escorted by 2 police deputies. But since Vicky was the assistant director, nobody challenged her big break in protocol. When 6 hours passed without their return, officials began to worry. Lauderdale County Sheriff's Department was given a surveillance video taken at a local gas station 8 minutes after the pair left the detention center, and it showed Vicky White's patrol car, not a place she was supposed to be driving to, while escorting a dangerous inmate. And then there was no sign of the car after that. When the deputies checked the courthouse's itinerary, they found that there were no hearings or evaluations that day. White never even had an appointment. Now authorities fear that Vicky may have been forced or coerced into helping Casey escape. They immediately initiated a statewide manhunt hoping to find her unharmed and to recapture Casey. But that theory that Vicky had been forced or coerced fell apart when investigators, poring over jail security cameras, immediately noticed some shit that was amiss. Vicky White not only showed no sign of fear or distress as the pair left the jail, she appeared very comfortable while breaking protocol by walking in front of Casey White. And there was something else, so subtle that provided a bigger clue. Though it was a somewhat warm day, Vicky White was wearing a jacket. And when the wind blew it open, it revealed she had a gun on her waist. Jailers not allowed to be armed since prisoners might overpower them and take their guns. And these would only be the first red flags in a long line of them to come. When investigators went to Vicky's parents' house, where she still lived, they found her purse with all her identification and credit cards on her bed. She had also placed her will and life insurance policy on a dresser to be found easily. That revealed to investigators she did not plan on ever coming back. Indeed, she had recently sold her home for $95,550, far less than the property's assessed value of over $235,000. She'd also cashed out her 401k and abruptly announced that she was retiring. They also found out that she had recently bought a shotgun and an AR-15 assault rifle, and that she had rented a storage unit under an assumed name. Vicky had clearly been colluding with Casey for a long, long time to help him escape. Why? Well, she was bored, lonely, and wanted some hard dick. And she picked a real bad place to get it. Investigators now found evidence of a relationship between Casey White and Vicky White going back about 2 years to 2020, including 1,100 phone calls recorded by the jail. They go over these calls, obviously, and almost every call, Casey White would tell Vicky White how beautiful she was, and when he was done complimenting her, he would ask her to do something for him, and she would. And every call, apparently without exception, would end in some phone sex, according to Lauderdale County DA Chris Connolly. Vicky White threw everything she had worked towards, threw it away just because she was horny. Yep, women can think with their little heads just like dudes can. She chose to let her clit do the thinking for her. Soon, their lust connection led to Casey getting preferential treatment. A jail surveillance video showed Vicky White delivering commissary goods directly into his cell. A hand would reach out of the slit of a pass-through, handing Vicky White a note, touching her hand. Other inmates, when interviewed, said something had been brewing between the two for a long time. Casey White's former cellmate, Georgino Lopez, I think it's Jordanillo. I don't know. I've seen a Jordanillo before. Jordanillo Lopez said Vicky White would often stand at the window and look into their cell. Even had a shower curtain installed so that they would have more privacy when they showered than most inmates. Other cellmates couldn't see behind the curtain, but Lopez said Vicky White would stand outside the window while Casey White showered at 6'9" tall. Casey would stand above the top of the shower curtain, at least as his head and maybe even shoulders, and could see Vicky White. And Lopez said she acted like she couldn't see him, but she knew what he was doing. Casey would stand in the shower, playing with himself while looking at Vicky. Then, while all the other inmates would be sent out to the prison yard, Casey would be allowed to stay behind in his cell where there are no cameras, and Lopez strongly assumed he and Vicky would get to fucking while they went out to the yard. With that information, a new phase of the manhunt begins, not to capture a hostage and a hostage taker, but to get a pair that may have fancied themselves as some sort of Bonnie and Clyde. Police get a big break when they recover the bright orange Ford Edge the pair had used as their initial getaway car once they ditched the sheriff's cruiser. Inside the car were receipts for spray paint. The two had apparently tried to spray paint the vehicle to change the color, but that didn't work out too well. Those receipts led to store surveillance footage and authorities' first look at Casey White after he had escaped. Casey had switched to a blue 2006 Ford F-150 pickup truck, which was captured by license plate readers and traffic cameras. Cameras had also captured a gray Cadillac, following the pickup truck being driven by a woman with brunette hair. Vicky had now dyed her hair. She's originally a blonde. The couple eventually arrived in Evansville, Indiana, where they rented a motel room. They reserved the room by paying a homeless man who was a convicted sex offender $100 to reserve the room for them. They paid for a 14-day stay. Early into the stay, Casey decided to ditch the Ford F-150, and the couple headed to a car wash to clean up the Cadillac. Car wash employee noticed them, thinking they were acting all suspicious, did a little research online, turned up some photos of the escaped felon and former guard, sent a surveillance video to the Evansville authorities May 9th, 2022. Duo now spotted a little bit later in another video getting into the gray Cadillac. Then Evansville police see the vehicle at a Motel 41, call for additional units to come make an arrest. Additional units arrived just after the couple had left the motel and entered the car. Casey White was driving, and now the police flip on their lights. Casey now speeds ahead on US 41, then drives the car off the highway into a grassy field. Police car is able to soon ram his vehicle. How fun would that be to do? And the pair's car rolls over into a ditch. Casey crawls out, puts his hands up, but Vicky is still in the car with a gunshot wound to her head. None of the police officers had fired their guns. Casey told the officers, "Please help my wife. She shot herself in the head and I didn't do it." Vicky's now rushed to a local hospital, pronounced dead hours later, and her death is ruled a suicide. Knowing the shame she would endure, the years she would spend behind bars where inmates would not likely welcome her with open arms since she was a former corrections officer, she chooses to end it all. In the getaway car, investigators found letters written by Casey White on a legal pad, which investigators said he had penned in the event of his death. The first was an open letter to law enforcement in which he wrote, "If you're reading this, I am dead, and I made Vicky White get me out." In another, he wrote, "Me and my wife," and they didn't get married, by the way, but he wrote, "Me and my wife are all over the news. Y'all are stupid, but my beautiful wife wants me to shoot her when and if y'all fuckers catch us. She wanted me to so we can go together." And yet another letter, Casey White wrote, "Tell all my family I couldn't take prison no more and thought I might as well for sure get a few sorry SOBs." Police also found $29,000 in cash, 4 guns, including semi-automatic weapons and an AR-15, and they found several wigs of different colors. Weirdly enough, in the weeks following their capture, the specific motel room in which Vicky and Casey stayed became highly sought after, with a waiting room list of over 60 bookings. And what would happen to Casey? Casey was returned to Alabama the next day after waiving his right for an extradition hearing. He was then transferred back to the state prison in Bessemer, Alabama. On July 11th, Casey White was charged with felony murder involving the death of Vicky White, even though it was determined that she did shoot herself. Guess they were going to argue that he created the situation that led to her death or something. Sources don't ever make it real clear. In May of 2023, Casey White reached a plea deal in which he pled guilty to first-degree prison escape, and in exchange for that plea would not be tried for any charges related to the death of Vicky White. Even when somebody pulls off an improbable prison escape, they seem to still end up back behind bars in the end, don't they? Even if you're a master escape artist, use the power of helicopters or the powers of seduction, you probably will be caught after a manhunt. It is very hard to evade police for a long time. And with modern technology, all these cameras everywhere, going to everything, electronic instead of like cash, it just keeps getting harder. There are only a handful of high-profile criminals who have both escaped and evaded capture for years in recent decades. Glenn Stewart Godwin was sentenced to a lengthy sentence in California's Folsom State Prison for a grisly murder in which he repeatedly stabbed his victim and then tried to destroy the body by blowing it up in a car. Godwin cut security bars in the yard of the prison, climbed through a storm drain, then jumped into a raft someone had left waiting for him, and then floated down the river to freedom in 1987. But then I should probably hit that button for that. for consistency. Then later that year, he was arrested in Mexico for drug trafficking and sentenced to prison in Guadalajara. And there, Godwin would escape from a Mexican prison in 1991, 5 months after murdering a fellow inmate who was a cartel member. The FBI added him to its 10 most wanted list in 1996. He's currently offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. Now 66 years old, if he is in fact still alive, the FBI believes he is most likely working in the drug trade for a cartel somewhere in Latin America. Glenn Stark Chambers was sentenced to life in prison for the 1975 fatal beating of his girlfriend, Connie Weeks, a 21-year-old waitress at Sarasota Lanes Bowling Alley and the mother of a toddler. Chambers escaped from Polk Correctional Institution in Florida, February 21st, 1990, by hiding in a truck that was leaving and then fleeing the truck before the driver was even aware that they ever had a passenger. Now 73. He has been allegedly spotted around the world over the years, as far away as New Zealand, and his prison escape was not his first. 15 years before he fled, at around 11 p.m., July 13th, 1975, Chambers and 2 other inmates overpowered a detention deputy who was returning an inmate to his cell. Chambers was hiding on a ledge, jumped on the deputy as he entered. The escapees then exited through a 3rd-floor window using a rope made of bed sheets, and they made it the fuck out again. One more time for that button. But Chambers was found 3 days later. And Chambers and Godwin, the exceptions to the rule. While very low-level criminals walk away from minimum security facilities or work release centers almost literally every day in America, actual prison breaks from maximum security detention centers are extremely rare. In 2023, CBS News dug into data from 26 states, which showed over 1,100 documented instances of escape from law enforcement custody over the past 5 years. Very few of those escapes were from prisons. For example, Montana had the highest number of reported escapes. But of the state's 381 documented incidents, all but 3, quote-unquote, escapes were from unsecure facilities. So places like halfway houses where instead of coming back, for curfew, they just didn't. So not really escapes. And as we saw, most people who do escape prison are recaptured. According to a 2018 study conducted by crimeandjusticeresearchalliance.org, more than 92% of all inmates are captured after they escape in the U.S. So moral of the story, don't get sent to prison. Odds are, if you do, you're going to end up staying there as long as they want to keep your ass there if you do. And that's it for this little edition of Time Sucks, Short Sucks. The first of 2025. Maybe more on brand than the first Time Suck of 2025, which is literally about shit. If you enjoyed this story, check out the rest of the Bad Magic catalog. Beefier episodes of Time Suck every Monday at noon Pacific time. And new episodes of the now long-running paranormal podcast, Scared to Death, every Tuesday at midnight, with 2 episodes of Nightmare Fuel, fictional horror, thrown into the mix each month. If you haven't checked those out, please do. I'm having so much fun. Thanks to Sophie Evans for the initial research on this one, and thank you to Logan Keith for recording and uploading today's episode. Please go to badmagicproductions.com for all your Bad Magic needs, and have yourself a great weekend.
Bad Magic Productions.